Hello everybody, my name is Dratnus and welcome to my tier list of major cooldowns here in World of Warcraft. I've selected the coolest cooldown from each spec in the game, and I'll be ranking them from S to F tiers. Generally, this is just the cooldown that's reduced by the Vision of Perfection essence. That was the kind of rule of thumb I used, but for a couple of specs I deviated from that where I thought that there was something cooler that wasn't the thing that was being reduced by Vision of Perfection. Mostly this is just like a damage cooldown, but for tanks and healer specs, obviously, things get a little bit murkier. I've kind of just gone with what I thought the coolest thing they had was, and we'll be rating those accordingly. Anyways, let's get into the video. So down in the F and D tiers, I'm going to place cooldowns that don't really do anything cool or interesting or change how a spec works. These are cooldowns in particular that feel really bad to have on the global cooldown. There, you spend a global pushing this button, and it feels like nothing really happened, or you spent a global just giving yourself a stat buff for a little while. This isn't supposed to be a tier list based on how numerically powerful or how much DPS each cooldown is worth. It's kind of more of a game designer-y one where we're talking about like what has merit in terms of being a cool and interesting ability. So starting off in the F tier, I'm going to place Adrenaline Rush, Outlaw Rogue's major cooldown here. Really nothing going on here except speeding up the rotation when you press this, and I think that's fairly boring. I'm also going to place Shadow Fiend down here. This is the Shadow Priest Shadow Fiend. Shadow Priest doesn't really have major cooldowns, so I think it's actually okay if specs don't have big cooldowns, but as far as Shadow Fiend goes, it feels like a very unimpactful button to press. So those two cooldowns are the only ones I'm going to put in the F tier for being the least impactful and cool in the game. Up in the D tier, I'm going to place mostly cooldowns that are just like a damage steroid plus some stat. I think that's fairly boring, and it feels especially bad to be on the global cooldown. So an example of this is like Icy Veins, the Frost Mage cooldown. This I'm putting in the D tier just because it is damage and haste. I'm also going to put Coordinated Assault in here. This is the Survival Hunter cooldown. This increases the damage that the Survival Hunter deals and their pet, which I don't think it's really, like, I don't think they should land on this as the kind of way that Survival should have a cooldown. I think instead, like, moving into Aspect of the Eagle, their ability that lets them do long-ranged attacks, turning that into a damage cooldown as well, I think would be cooler. I think Coordinated Assault, like, the flavor of it doesn't really fit with how I think the new Survival kit should work, so A of all, they should either just change Survival back to the way it used to be back in, like, Wrath of the Lich King. That was cool. But if they're stuck on it being a melee spec, I think giving the cooldown something other than your pet and you deal more damage, like, that feels like a Beast Mastery thing to me. I'm also going to put Shadow Blades in here. Shadow Blades actually does a couple of more interesting things. This is the Subtlety cooldown. It's on a very long cooldown and does very low damage, so it kind of feels bad to press for those reasons, and it feels pretty bad to be on the global cooldown because nothing really happens when you press it. But it does make all your stuff generate an extra combo point, so that's kind of cool. And that, I guess, is what's keeping it out of the F tier. Celestial Alignment, the Balanced Druid cooldown. Damage and haste, a perfect candidate for being in the D tier. Again, this one, especially when upgraded into Incarn, like, this is a lot of damage. It feels good when it goes off just because it's a lot of damage, but it's not really doing anything cool or interesting or changing how the spec plays while it's up. And for me, those are characteristics of the really cool DPS cooldowns. Recklessness goes in here as well. Recklessness actually feeling a little better with an Azurite trait, so Recklessness is damage and crit. And there's an Azurite trait that cares about crit, so there's kind of cool, multiplying effects there, but even still, just damage and crit, making it into the D tier for me. Protection Warriors cooldown that I've chosen for this is Avatar. Maybe it would have been better to choose something like Shield Wall or Last Stand, but none of those are really all that interesting or cool for me, and so, the fact Protection Warrior has like a bunch of cooldowns, but each one of them, none of them really do anything all that cool. And finally, the last cooldown I'm going to put in the D tier is Berserk, the Feral Druid cooldown. Again, this is kind of like Adrenaline Rush also. It's a energy, like, it increases the amount of energy you can have, like Adrenaline Rush, and it reduces the energy cost of your abilities instead of just speeding everything up, but it ends up feeling pretty similar there, and I'm going to put it in the D tier. Moving up to the C tier, we're going to get the first healer cooldown of this tier list, Tranquility. Tranquility is actually, it's a cooldown that has at times in WoW's history been a very strong thing. Right now, it's in a little bit of a weaker spot, and especially coming off of Legion. In Legion, Druids could move while tranking, and anytime they make something that you can move into something that you can't move while you're casting, that makes it feel a lot worse. And so Trank, I think down in the C tier for now, given just how kind of weak it feels compared to previous versions of the spell. I'm also going to put Divine Hymn into the C tier, pretty similar to Tranquility, just a button you press that heals everybody, and, gets channeled, and, medium but kind of boring. The marksmanship cooldown is True Shot, and that is also going in the C tier. At least this gives you a charge of aim shot when you use it, so that kind of makes it feel sort of cool and does something useful, but this, again, just a damage and stat steroid, making it in the C tier. Fortifying Brew is Brewmaster's major cooldown, and I'm also placing that in the C tier. This increases their maximum health, reduces their damage taken, both fairly boring, but bringing it up to the C tier is the fact that it causes them to stagger extra damage for the duration. And for me, that's enough to make it into the C tier. You know, an interaction with the class-specific mechanic or with the spec-specific mechanic, to me, makes it interesting enough to get into this tier. Bestial Wrath is the Beast Mastery cooldown. This is pretty much the same text as Coordinated Assault, the survival cooldown, but for Beast Mastery, increasing the damage that you and your pet deal feels a lot more iconic and feels a lot more in line with what the spec is trying to do. I also like the fact that Bestial Wrath is just kind of off cooldown, all that, like, you can reduce the cooldown by doing a bunch of different things, and that is interesting, so I'm putting it up in the C tier, whereas Coordinated Assault is only down in the D tier. Arcane Power into the C tier, again, similar to actually Fortifying Brew here, you know, damage steroid like you'd expect, but then it comes with a interaction with the spec-specific mechanic, in this case, mana cost reduction for Arcane Mage, which I think makes it interesting enough to go into the C tier. This one in particular, another one that's just like, feels bad because it's on the global cooldown, and you press your cooldown and nothing exciting happens for a little bit. So almost all of the C and D tier abilities that are damage abilities have this sort of feeling where, you know, they increase your damage for some amount of time, but it feels bad to actually press them because you just press them and you're doing nothing for that global. Vendetta, also in the C tier here. There's some glimmers of hope for this thing, especially with some Azerite traits, the Nothing Personal Azerite trait, making this into a powerful dot in and of itself when you click it is pretty cool. But without that, it's just another ability that you just have to press, and your character doesn't do anything cool, just kind of points at the thing that you're vendettaing, and then you do more damage to it for a little while, a lot more damage, and that's cool. And you make some extra energy, and that's also cool. But up front, just something that I think that, like, Nothing Personal, the Azerite trait, should be default or something. They should make sure that going into the next expansion, we continue to have an upfront effect on something like Vendetta. Moving on into the B tier, we're going to see our first Warlock cooldown here with Summon Dark Glare. The Warlock major cooldowns, I think, are actually fairly well designed on the whole. Summon Dark Glare is the Affliction one, and when you summon it, you increase the duration of all your dots on everything, and then it does more damage based on the number of dots that are out. So a very cool way of keying into the Affliction mechanic of, you know, dots mattering. Summon Demonic Tyrant, pretty much the same thing, except for Demonology Warlock, and it cares about your demons that are out. It just extends them. I don't know. Demonology is kind of like Affliction in that you have these dots, except Blizzard has cleverly turned the dots into little imps that stand out there and shoot people, but even so, a equally cool and impactful way of tying in with the spec's, you know, core functionality. So I'm going to put this also in the B tier. Guardian Druids have Incarnation. This one they do have to talent into, but I think it's cool enough when talented into. I like what it does. It makes multiple of their abilities behave differently. It makes Mangle into like a cleave ability, and it lets them spam taunts and stuff. So all of that is pretty cool, and I think makes it into the B tier. It just kind of fundamentally changes how your rotation works while it's up, and what kind of things you can do. Enhancement Shaman can talent into Ascendance, which is actually pretty cool. It transforms them into this like Wind Ascendant, and their attacks become like long range. They become 30-yard wind attacks for a little while that like bypass armor. So very cool feeling effect. And this is, I think, what would maybe be, like, it would be maybe better if Survival Hunter's major cooldown was changed to something like this as well, because I think that really kind of fits the feel of, you know, the Survival Hunter. And turning a melee spec into a range spec during their damage cooldown. Also, I think, a very cool thing about Ascendance. I'm putting Paladin's Wings into the B tier. This is actually all three specs of Paladin's Wings. Paladin Wings, you know, on the face of it, it looks pretty similar to many of the abilities I put in the D tier, damage and crit. But A of all, it's just such an iconic Paladin ability. It's been so good for so long, and it looks so cool that I think it that helps bring it up one tier. And then the other tier is the fact that this also has unique interactions with each Paladin spec. So, you know, it makes the next Ret ability you use crit, or the next finisher, rather, the Ret uses crit. It makes the next heal that Prop Pallies use crit. And it reduces Holy Shot cooldown while you're a Holy Pally using this, as long as you have the right talent. So that is enough for me to make it feel like it's worth actually pressing this button. You know, one of the problems with these other classes is you press your Icy Veins, and then nothing actually happens up front. But when you press your Avenging Wrath as a Ret Pally, you're charging up your next finisher, right? Now it's guaranteed to crit. And for me, that's enough to get it the other tier up all the way into the B tier. Summon Infernal is the Destruction Warlock cooldown. This is a cool one because it comes with a stun, so you're dropping an Infernal on your enemies, and it comes from the sky and it stuns them when it lands. That is enough cool effect for me. Sticking some sort of crowd control effect or anything like that onto a DPS cooldown, I think is a cool enough twist to bring it up to the B tier as well. Revival is the Mistweaver cooldown. This is sort of similar to Tranquility or Divine Hymn, except it's not channeled. You just press it and all the healing comes out at once, which is cool. I don't know if it's better or worse on average, but it's cool. And this comes with a Dispel of everybody, of pretty much everything. So tacking that kind of mass Dispel effect onto the major cooldown. Again, little thing like that is enough for me to make it feel cool and interesting and special. And that brings it up to the B tier for me. Touch of Death is the Windwalker cooldown that I've chosen for this, not Storm, Earth, and Fire. I think Touch of Death is kind of cooler because it's really this DPS cooldown that instead of making you do more damage for its duration, it kind of snapshots a percentage of the damage that you deal while it's active, and then at the very end just explodes for that amount of damage on the target. So you can really, if you do a good rotation into your Touch of Death, even though effectively it's the same effect as just increasing the damage while Touch of Death is active, the fact that it just kind of all pops at once and can maybe just do like a massive hit on something is cool enough for me to be in the B tier as well. And finally, we have the Vengeance Demon Hunter Metamorphosis here. This is a tank cooldown that just makes them big and tanky. Does turn them into a cool looking demon, but nothing else super exciting going on. The fact that it has a cool visual definitely matters to me. For me, that's an important part of how well designed these abilities are, is if they look cool. But beyond that, just increasing their health and armor and stuff, it wouldn't be enough to bring it into the B tier. Luckily, this does also empower some of their abilities and change a little bit how the spec feels to play. And for me, that is enough to nudge it up into that B tier also. All right, up into the A tier. These are the abilities that I'm starting to think are really awesome. Rapture is the ability I picked for Discipline Priest. Barrier was a close second. Choosing between these two abilities was hard. I ended up going with Rapture because I feel like this is just such a cool and discipline-themed way to have a healing cooldown. It's putting out Power Word Shields on everybody and making them stronger. And Power Word Shield has just been so associated with Discipline Priest over the years. And Rapture is it's so powerful, and there's a lot of gameplay to it. You press it, and then it doesn't just do all the healing for you. You still have to pick the right targets to Power Word Shield. And it turns an immobile spec into a mobile spec for a little while. So all in all, I think just an amazing cooldown, versatile, and just fantastic. Fire Mage's cooldown is Combustion, and I'm putting it in the A tier. On the face of it, this looks like a cooldown that is pretty similar to ones that I placed in the D tier. It just gives them crit and then some mastery based on the amount of crit that they had, but it gives them 100% crit. 100% crit is a lot different for me than like 20% crit or 20% haste or whatever. 100% crit fundamentally changes the way the spec plays because they key off the amount of crit they have. And it just, in the Combustion window, their rotation is so different and so cool and does so much damage. So I'm putting it up in the A tier. The first Death Knight ability that I'm going to place on this tier list is Unholy's Army of the Dead. This one I think makes it up into the A tier. Like, on the surface of it, this is just a button that you press that then summons a bunch of pets for you that do some damage, but there's a lot of things that I think really make this ability shine. It has a cool animation that's channeled over a long time, but you can still do other stuff while it's happening. You like raise your weapon, you start summoning zombies out of the ground, so that's pretty cool. And it feels really like the fact that it's on such a long cooldown. It's on an 8-minute cooldown. That is interesting and different than everything else, and I think brings it up into the A tier. Frost Death Knight's cooldown that I've chosen for this is Frostworm's Fury. I had a hard choice here. I could have also picked something like Empower Rune Weapon or Breath of Sindragosa, but I decided to go with Frostworm's Fury because to me this is the coolest thing that Frost Death Knights do, which is summoning, basically Sindragosa to, go out in front of you and just breathe on everything and freeze them all and do huge amounts of damage. And ever since this has been introduced in the game, the fact that you just have this one button you can press that does so much damage up front, and it's a cool shape, right? A line ability in front of you is fairly different than what everybody else gets. So very cool effect, and I'm putting it in the A tier. Arms Warrior's major cooldown is Blade Storm, and I'm also placing that in the A tier. This ability, you just press it and then you start spinning around and hitting everything with your sword, but you can still move while you're doing it, and they've pushed the damage on it enough that it's good to press on single target as well. Very cool effect and unique among all the class cooldowns as well, not just increasing damage or something. It really does something special and different for the duration it's active, so I'm putting it in the A tier. Elemental Shaman gets Stormkeeper. This is the ability I've chosen rather than Fire Elemental or Storm Elemental, because I think that it's a lot cooler. So basically they like raise their weapon up to the sky, lightning comes and charges their weapon up, and then after they finish channeling that and charged up their weapon, their next two lightning bolts or chain lightnings are massively empowered. The lightning bolt's not too cool to use, doesn't feel too awesome to use, it just does a lot of extra damage and hits twice. But chain lightning, when you have used Stormkeeper, overloads 5 times as long as you're hitting 5 or more targets. So you just cast your chain lightning after using Stormkeeper, and it just does like a huge, Emperor Palpatine Sith lightning thing on everything, and zaps them for huge amounts of damage that looks really cool and feels special as well. To me, this is what a good thing that makes sense to have a cast time or be on the global cooldown does, because you're charging up yourself, and then you do something special afterwards instead of just charging up yourself by spending a global cooldown to increase your damage by 1%. And finally, in the S tier, there are 3 specs remaining: 1 tank, 1 healer, and 1 DPS spec. The DPS cooldown I've chosen to be in the S tier is Havoc Demon Hunter Metamorphosis. This really combines all of the things that I think are awesome in DPS cooldowns. It's on a long cooldown, so it feels special when you use it. Using it itself does an interesting thing that justifies it being on the global cooldown. So you leap into the air, you land, and when you land, you do some damage and stun everything, or slow things if they're players and not enemies, or not NPCs. And then it turns you into this demon that has empowered abilities for a long time and does a lot of extra damage, and you're a different character model, you have all this leech. So a very cool effect, feels very different to be in meta. Meta being up is a really notable thing, and the fact that it comes with this like teleport, while you are in the air, you can use it to move a really long distance, or you can use it as an immunity. While you're in your meta leap, you're immune to a bunch of things. So there's a lot of room for small gameplay at the top level to use this cooldown in a special and interesting way. And it just feels fantastic to press this button, so I'm bringing it up into the S tier. The tank cooldown that has made it into the S tier is Mass Grip, Blood Death Knight's Gorfiend's Grasp ability. A very cool, even though it's been nerfed over the years a little bit, is still a very cool ability. The powerful effect of just running into the middle of a bunch of enemies and then bang, they're all grouped up in one location and can be killed there, is just extremely awesome, and it feels very Death Knight-y. Death Grip has been the big thing that Death Knights have had for a long time, and doing it to everything near you is just, like, it's elegant and it's cool, so it's S tier. And the healer cooldown that I'm placing in the S tier is Resto Shaman's Spirit Link Totem. This is such an awesome ability. It's very powerful, but it also does something that nothing else in the game really does. You place it down, and then everybody in the raid can go in it and share health with each other, and that's really strong, right? It's strong in a lot of different cases because people are very, very unlikely to die while they're in there. But it's not, it's not just big amounts of numbers on everybody. It's not a huge amount of healing to everybody. Instead, it's a cooldown that is powerful but does something unique and special. So S tier status for me. I hope everybody has enjoyed this look at the cooldowns that I think are the coolest in World of Warcraft. I spent a lot of time in this video talking about the global cooldown because that's kind of the big thing that if you talk to players who've played more than just BFA, they will note how everything being on the global cooldown feels clunky. But I hope that this video has given you some insight into the abilities that I think are working well on the global cooldown. These are like the B tier and higher cooldowns on this list, I think justify being on the global cooldown. And they just need to come up with ways to move the ones in the C, D, and F tiers up in some way. Give them some sort of cool, impactful thing that's going on. That makes it make sense that they are on the global cooldown, instead of just feeling anemic and slow to have to press them and have your character just play like... many of these, your character just like plays an emote. Adrenaline Rush, your character just like does like a roar emote. Vendetta, your character just does a point emote. And then, maybe your character like glows red or a little bit or something for some of these. So none of that I think is cool enough, like things like Meta or Bladestorm or Stormkeeper, to justify being on the global cooldown. So I think that is a big thing that Blizzard should look to do going into future expansions, is come up with a way to make the cooldowns matter enough and feel cool enough to be on that global cooldown. Anyways, that's been my little game design spiel for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. If you did enjoy the video, like and subscribe. Happy holidays. Check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Dratnos. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.